I think it's just, we have so much information at our fingertips today. Yeah. It's all about just staying connected.
And talking to people is so important because as much information as we have, nothing is going to make you more involved in your community more than interacting with them.
You can easily go out and vote, but it's so important for you to be educated and informed in what you're actually voting for.
We're at that age where we're about to be making the decisions. The more people who are informed, the better.
Born in the South, just before the start of the Civil War, John Roy Lynch belonged to a family of an enslaved mother and an Irish immigrant father.
He grew up as a slave who was punished for his sense of humor and rebellious nature, and he wasn't freed until he was 16 by the Emancipation Proclamation.
For a brief moment of time, during Reconstruction, African Americans in the South had freedom, and John Roy Lynch was part of this new generation.
He found work in photography, which he called the opportunity of his life.
He learned how to read and write, and he started engaging with everyone.
These are the years after the Civil War when 4 million African Americans have been freed in the South, but nobody has any plan. So there's a possibility that even after all the fighting and the struggle of the Civil War, nothing will change.
He eventually became an advocate for former slaves. He impresses the Mississippi governor so much in one conversation that he gets appointed to Justice of the Peace of Natchez, Mississippi.
And then soon after that, he was voted into Congress as its youngest member at the time.
At only the age of 26, he was a part of the U.S. Congress.
And he was the first and the last African American to get elected to Congress from Mississippi for 100 years. The Khmer Girls in Action were founded in Long Beach, California, in response to the lack of political participation among what was then the largest Cambodian American community in America.
They came here from Cambodia, a country that was going through a very, very rough time in the 1970s. They were going through a genocide that killed almost 2 million people.
They came from a dictatorship, and they were fearful to engage in politics because of their past.
So these girls were really kind of compelled to assess what their community needs were and to figure out why so many Cambodian youth were lacking social services. Many were not graduating from high school and even attending college, and many of them live in poverty.
Young teenage girls in these Cambodian communities do massive voter registration drives, and they get a very, very high number of Cambodians registered to vote.
They focus on economic justice and gender roles and female reproductive education.
They were called Khmer Girls because they were mostly girls, and wound up creating an organization to help their people further is incredibly inspiring.
John Roy Lynch used his rhetoric and his political skills to get people involved in a way that I think we can really emulate today.
He started from nothing. He educated himself, he taught himself, and it's just so inspirational.
If we want to become like modern day John Roy Lynch's, it's all about just staying connected. He didn't have Twitter, he didn't have Snapchat or Facebook. He went out into his community and he saw the problems that African Americans after the Civil War were facing.
And you hear these things about how people are suffering or how some people are flourishing, but you never really know until you talk to the people in that community.
You don't really have a voice unless you're engaged. And that's what the Khmer Girls saw in their community. And they got thousands of people registered to vote. And that's what we can do today.
The Khmer Girls had such a scary background, and they still broke through their fears, and they still spoke about what they believed in.
Fear is definitely a huge contributor in whether or not people vote. And when you consider the people who we have to convince, it sounds a lot easier. So it's definitely really inspiring.
The first thing that I'm gonna do to prepare for the next election is make sure that I'm registered to vote wherever I go to college, because I'm going to enter college right when the election is going to happen.
So I'm only 16, so I won't be able to vote in the next election, but I can influence other people and communicate. I can still make sure that my voice is heard.
Make sure that everybody you know is registered. Like if you know your uncle or your aunt or your cousin or your parents or your grandparents aren't registered, encourage them to register. And then after that, try to like help them make the most informed decision they can.
At the end of the day, democracy has to be learned by each generation.